beautiful friend.
I am jumping with joy that it's finally all over, but sadness runs deeply in my veins. What has happened to my childhood TV show? Now, in all seriousness, I'm a grown-up now, and I'm finally ready to move on from this show. Now we have the final nail in Doctor Who's coffin, and I'm ready to hammer it in with a beaming smile on my face. Perhaps now we can get that petition going to put Doctor Who on hiatus for a bit. So the final episode had a fairly cool introduction. It starts off with a lad who can craft nature with his own mind, and the Stenza returning. It felt like it had the makings of a decent episode. The first problem, however, comes with the 3,000 years later aspect. It shows up on screen as a transition into the TARDIS, but therein lies the first issue. This is a time machine. It does not have a time when they're whisking around in the vortex. It was a shame that that budget didn't allow for more showing of this lad's powers. Did it take them 3,000 years to build the ship, or did they just build it and wait? When they're discussing the call for help in the TARDIS, Graham had an amazing moment when he said, "Oh, Gold Doc, do we have to investigate today? Can't we just have a day off?" And the Doctor's like, "Nobody else has responded to it," as though she could possibly know this to be the case. Oh, sorry, I forgot that nothing is a mystery to the Doctor anymore, and she always manages to figure things out just by opening her mouth. They then find Robert Baratheon on this ship, who is possibly the dullest character of this series. What a wasted opportunity for such a talented actor. They could have had him as the Jabba the Hutt character in episode 2, or even play the manager of the Kablam factory. Instead, they give him the role of some bloke in space. We learn nothing from him, and his name is hilarious. Paul Tracky. It didn't help either that when they answered the phone, the people on the other end just kept saying his name over and over.
Paul Tracky. Paul Tracky.
Paul Tracky.
Paul Tracky.
Paul Tracky.
Paul Tracky.
Paul Tracky.
Then, with the fluidity of a professional camera crew, Tim Shaw reveals to Paul Tracky what happens to people who mess with the Stenza. Unfortunately, the camera cuts away from it just at the right moment, and a cringe-inducing selection of reaction shots follow.
Her name was Sang.
What? The South Korean voice actor who provides the voices of the South Korean dub of Thomas the Tank Engine? More to the point, actually, screw this, I'm calling him Robert. Don't forget, the Doctor just dosed him up with drugs as well. It certainly felt a bit monkey see, monkey do right here, but wasn't there a David Tennant episode where the Doctor is super against the idea of mental stabilization?
Don't push too hard. They work slowly.
I don't know why they didn't leave the Tim Shaw reveal until later on when we see him plugged into this wad of machinery. This is an excellent shot too, but that's about the extent of my praise for his inclusion in this episode. They ruin the surprise of who the creator is 9 minutes into the episode. The Doctor is up to her usual borderline criminal antics here too. So you're first of all manipulating a man who is in need of mental clarity. A little bit later, after staring at some desolate wastes, she gets some gear out from her backpack that she took from Robert's ship. She full on admits to it too, and he's totally fine with it. He's probably totally fine with it because he's been drugged.
You're on drugs!
And the Doctor was able to manipulate her way into getting what she wants once again. She even took bombs. She won't allow the killing of a murderer, as we're bashed over the head about so many times this series, but so long as it, whatever it is, can be rebuilt, she'll allow it. And what happens if you kill somebody by accident because you didn't like a wall being in the way, Doctor? You can't rebuild someone's life force once it's gone.
Our rules change all the time.
Well, of course they do. I remember so vividly how certain and assured she was in the pilot. Her philosophies were rigid, and now she's just a Theresa May, flip-flopping on every issue that comes her way. I was thinking that the Doctor would confront some form of regret for not killing Tim Shaw when she had the chance. Obviously, her anti-violence policy comes first and all, but it seems that the Doctor's peacefulness doesn't come from herself, but from producers reluctant to create new monsters. They're just milking the only good villain they had, and they know it. I know this series has been radical enough not to include any of the classic monsters, but sadly isn't quite quite radical enough to create new ones that have had any real threat or impact whatsoever. Take the cloth thing in episode 2, for example, which prophesied something about a timeless child or whatever that was never even touched on again. Then, when the gang are out for a walk, Graham suddenly does a full 180 and decides that he's going to be the man to kill Tim Shaw. Well, of course you are. They just had to turn him from the funniest and most interesting character this year into a psycho because revenge is bad, guys. Every time they flirt with this idea in the episode, Graham doesn't muster an ounce of courage to stand up to the Doctor. Every time she just says, no, that's the end of their conversation. If he was that committed to killing Tim Shaw, why would he let anybody stand in his way? The best part of it all, though, is that the Doctor splits up the group to prevent Graham from getting up close and personal with Tim. This not only had the adverse effect in the end anyway, but surely you would want to keep Graham close to you, Doc, just in case he does act on his irrational instincts.
Should have brought wellies. That could have been another precaution. Always bring wellies. I love wellies. In fact, I think I half invented them.
Then they board the ship via the sonic plot advancer and rub it in our faces once again that Graham is out for revenge in his conversation with Ryan. Fortunately, a group of those stupid robots from episode 2 break up the argument. Remember when they failed to predict the gang's path back then? Well, they apparently failed to notice Ryan and Graham yelling duck and dropping to the ground because they end up shooting each other instead. I groaned when I saw them reappear in this episode, but I think I groaned myself into an early grave by the time this bit was over and done with. The Doctor then runs into the woman from the opening scene, who is another character plagued with a hilariously stupid name, Andinio of the Ux. The Doctor then explains away the backstory of the Ux to seal the leaking plot hole that these characters have survived a 3,000-year-long existence. Doing nothing. That sounds ridiculous, right? Surely that can't be the case. Let's ask the Doctor. She'll know.
Oh, I can't remember.
Then we have a boring and meaningless conversation between Robert and Yaz, and just like earlier with Ryan and Graham, a bunch of sniper bots are dispensed with before you can say the word sniper bot.
Sniper bots!
Oh, it gets worse.
He's built an army of them!
They have an army of those things.
Right. Who edited this crap? Afterwards, the Doctor says this.
And your words are certain, but your eyes are full of doubt.
And then we see the eyes of doubt in a close-up. Why has this series been so afraid of just showing anything? You may have noticed this week that I'm not bothering to point out every time this happens because there are just too damn many times it occurs in this episode. The episode never fails to point out the obvious via dialogue, whilst also being a continuous journey of telling and not showing, leaving us with an episode that is almost entirely walking and talking. I'm saying it now. This is the most boring finale Doctor Who has ever produced. Right, so we've covered the first half of the episode, at least there's some solace to be found in that. Then we get around to seeing old Toothy Pegs, who also hasn't changed in 3,000 years. He says that the Doctor somehow banished him to the planet of randomness and convenience, where he is unable to leave without dying. So why haven't you died of old age already? Okay, you're an alien, you've got help, whatever. And I'll admit, it was cool he was on the Doctor's turf in episode 1 and now they're on his. But it turns out that he, like Graham, is just out for revenge. Revenge on what, I hear you ask? The Doctor. So instead of taking her out then and there, after waiting 3,000 years, he stands up and reveals his entire plan to her. Then Aldino wakes up her sidekick Delphox, who also, funnily enough, hasn't changed one bit in 3,000 years. Look, I know I keep saying it and that these two are capable of living for millennia, but the fact he hasn't been able to do anything about his circumstances for so long is completely unbelievable. Anyway, we find out that these super important vibrating glass boxes contain planets, where any potential life would have been destroyed as a result of this compression. Ooh, what's that? I feel a scratching sensation in my mind. I'm being reminded of that finale. Which one is it? Oh yeah, The Stolen Earth and Journey's End, 10 years ago. Feeling old yet, boys and girls? Yes, the finale of Series 4 contains practically the same situation as we witnessed in this year's finale. You know, when the Daleks took a bunch of planets out of orbit to fuel their ultimate destructive weapon? Yep. I think roughly the same thing was about to take place in this episode, just the baddie and the outstanding quality of writing was replaced. This may change subject to review. It gets even better though. The sniper bots then tried to burn through a door just like the Daleks did back in 2005's episode The Parting of the Ways. Chibnall, you can't complain that the show is too dependent on the old by removing all the classic enemies whilst also ripping plot points from the finales of the past 13 years. Nitpicks was right. You are a hack fraud. Tim Shaw then continues to repeat himself about being a god and his alliance with the Ux over and over. Then, because Ryan and Graham are setting people free, that's enough to prompt him to get out of bed and cause some hurt. The Doctor fixes the laser situation by putting her mood alteration blocker thing on the Ux. She explains that this is because the Ux can alter the universe by thought, the cheapest excuse for a doomsday plot device the show has ever produced. The most disappointing thing though was that the planet didn't affect her and Yaz in a profound and immediate enough way. They do get a little headache, but this is not interesting as it's so meaningless. It might have been interesting to have the pair lose their minds to such an extent that the Ux turn on their master, seeing the misery he has caused, and in turn rescues them. Instead, the Doctor just does what she always does, talks her way out of a predicament, and tells the Ux just how wrong they are. The Doctor zaps her TARDIS into the room with her Sonic, this might as well be the Sonic Screwdriver show at this point, and takes the blockers back from the Ux. Could you not have just grabbed a few more from inside the TARDIS? Then we jump to Ryan being outside, sending all the hostages back to Robert's ship. Two questions arise though. How did Ryan figure out how to get all these people off of a floating spaceship? Secondly, why are they all wearing the same clothes? Oh, sorry guys, I just got a text from Chibnall. He says, there wasn't enough time at this point for a character to explain all of this to us. Which is a thankful shame. Then Graham confronts Darth Vader, Tim Shaw. After blowing up the robots with that cringy yippee-ki-yay line, he has no real reason to stay down here. All the people have been freed, now you're gonna look for Tim, right? Nah, let's just have him standing around down here for no reason instead. Graham then pulls the Luke Skywalker trick out of the bag, pretending he's peaceful, and then removes a limb from his enemy to stop him in his tracks. Then the fist bump happens, which I would have been happy with if they hadn't just ripped off Star Wars and two of the best Doctor Who finales beforehand. The Doctor then saves the day with the TARDIS. Finally. Took us all season to finally put it to use, but hey, we got there in the end. It was a very convenient Doctor Who-y ending, using all the technologies of all the races to put the planets back where they belong. Then they all say goodbye like it was just another episode to pass the time. Which it was. Let's face it. So, did it suck? Aside from an intro that screamed potential and a few nice shots dotted about, there really isn't anything credible about this episode. We could have had some insight into what took place over those 3,000 years, but we didn't. We could have had a decent character written for Mark Addy, but we didn't. We could have done without the usual dependence on exposition, pointing out the obvious, and the Doctor's continually bizarre behaviour, but we didn't. Tim Shaw's return was unnecessary and cheap. The originality of this episode strikes an all-time low for the show, along with titles for names and planets being hilariously bad or practically unpronounceable. I think I've had one too many series with Chibnall at the helm, and when you hear that a show has 11 seasons already, I truly think that it's time to stop. I give the Battle of Ranskoor av Kolos a 1 out of 10.